Perfect. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be on chapter 37. We gave a summary of the chapter last week. Oh, Maddie. Oh, there you go. Maddie, you're on. Good. I just saw your text. Okay. Phew.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you all.
So we'll be doing great. Thank you. Nice to see you, Maddie. Glad you're part of it. So we're going to be chapter 37. You can see there's if you're looking in the book, it's on page 408. It starts by saying your struggle is worth it, part 3. The reason why we're saying part 3 is because chapter 35, 36, and 37 is all part of one topic. When this is actually closing a beautiful discussion that we've been having from chapter 35. I already gave an overview of what the chapter is talking about not last week because we didn't have a class, but 2 weeks ago. So if you weren't part of that, I suggest you listen to the recording. You could go on jewishnevada.com/virtual. It'll have all of my classes. There's also a tab if you missed Adina's Torah and Tea on Thursdays. You could also watch recordings of Adina's Torah and Teas on her page. And there's some insights over there. Anyway, we're going to be going inside once again, page 408. It's towards the bottom. We're going to be studying the text today, and of course, feel free to ask any questions. And I will also bring it up on the screen. Okay, here we go. I'll just pull it up. Here we go. All right, chapter 37, your struggle is worth it. Part 3, section 1, a mitzvah and its reward. Throughout chapter 35 and 36, the Tanya has attempted to offer us some comfort over our spiritual predicament. This was a comfort specifically for the Beinoni who feels that he'll never reach emotional perfection. He's always working on his behavior. He sees the success, but he says, what's the point of it? Back in the text, while we may not be able to worship God with the emotional intensity and consistency of the tzaddik, we can achieve external mastery over our actions. And that, the Tanya has argued, is actually more important in the scheme of things. It is sacred action in the form of mitzvah observance, which fulfills God's purpose in creation, making a home for God in the lowest realms. In this chapter, the Tanya continues to explore this theme in further depth. So this idea that it's our action that is making a home for God will continue along that theme with specific examples, as we will soon see. Now, the fullest expression of this reality of a home for God in the lowest realms, which in Hebrew we said was a dira b'tachtonim, a home in the lowest of realms, is, as we have learned in chapter 36, in the time of the Messianic era and the revival of the dead, since at that time there will be a disclosure of the blessed infinite light within this physical world. So where will the fullest expression of this power of God's home be? It'll be mainly when Mashiach comes, especially during the time of the resurrection. At that time, the infinite light will be fully enclosed in this world. I'm just going to email the link to Adrian. She's waiting to get in, but she prefers an email. 1 second. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. What's interesting is this idea, maybe we discussed this briefly in the past, the resurrection for many people is a very unfamiliar idea. I wouldn't say uncomfortable, but I would go out on a limb at least to say it's unfamiliar. What does it mean, resurrection? And what it means is a very comforting thing, God forbid, for someone who has lost a loved one to know that they will come back to us in their body, the way they were in their full health, will come back in this world. For most of history, that was a very unfamiliar and understood idea, a misunderstood idea. But really in the past years with the concept of DNA, understanding how you could recreate, you could graft we could, in the Talmud, it actually says it'll come from a specific bone. It's known as the luz bone, which is at the back of the top of our spine. That bone will actually recreate our body. So it's almost like a DNA understanding. But the point that we're trying to say in this chapter is that the full light of the essence of God that will be infinite and in this world that will be revealed will be when Mashiach comes. But it will be through our physical action that we'll be able to accomplish this, that we make a home for God. In chapter 36, we learned that God's purpose in creating the world will only be completely fulfilled in the future, during the Messianic era. Yet we also learned that the future home for God in the lowest realms is not a phenomenon disconnected with our activity in the current era. So if you remember 2 weeks ago, we were discussing that there's two types of rewards. There's one type of reward that doesn't really have what to do with the effort that we put in. For example, in school, they give you candy for handing in your homework after a certain amount of weeks. The candy has nothing to do with the work I did. It's an arbitrary reward. But what we're going to be explaining here is that the light of God coming into this world, when Mashiach comes as a result of our actions of mitzvahs, is not an arbitrary reward that we did mitzvahs, God gives us our candy, God gives us our light. It's a direct result. The reward, it's like when someone is feeling cluttered in their mind because their house is dirty. When they clean their house, their reward for cleaning their house is a clean house. So they worked hard. What is the reward for their effort? They now have a clean house. That's the reward. It's not an arbitrary reward. It's directly connected. So for someone who works hard on planting and sowing their tomato patch, the reward is delicious tomatoes. It's directly connected with the effort they put in. And the same is true with the coming of Mashiach, which is the complete home for God that we make in this world. The effort that we put in, which is the mitzvahs we do, is a direct connection with the reward, which will be the home for God when Mashiach comes. All this is dependent, the Tanya continues, on our mitzvah actions and our worship in prayer throughout the whole period of exile, which gradually and cumulatively neutralizes the forces of Clipa. Which I think this idea that to realize it's a team effort, that in every generation, and I love this idea, every generation contributes to making this home for God. A person may feel the previous generations, they were unsuccessful. They didn't bring Mashiach. They didn't make a home for God. And if they weren't able to do it, how could we do it? They were on a much higher level. But the beauty here is it's cumulative, which means we could only accomplish what we do based on the work that they did. They accomplished a certain amount and we're taking it to the next level. In the word of the Midrash, it actually says we are like a midget on the shoulders of giants. Kanana Sagabi Anakin, like a midget on the shoulders of giants, while the previous generations were giants in comparison to us. And we may feel like midgets, but it's connected. We go on their shoulders and we're able to see even further. So if there's a certain wall that's only going up to a certain level where the giant is not able to see over, if he puts a midget over him on his shoulders, he now has that extra few feet where he could see over the wall. So while the giants accomplished so much, even though we may feel like midgets in comparison to them, we are a team effort, accumulation of their work. And now us on top of it, we're able to bring them that level of Mashiach. We're in the middle of the Kindle page and we will continue. And also in the middle of 409 in the book. Of course.
Can I ask a question first?
Of course. Yes, Yaakov. First of all, it's great to see you. It's been a while. Chaim, welcome back. I'll make a blessing on my drink over here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol niyah bidvaro.
Yeah, I finally got the chance to be able to sit in. I'm stuck in Houston right now, so But my question is about the reward, the mitzvah and the reward concept. Isn't it the wrong reason to do something looking forward to the reward?
Yep, good point. So in general, the Rambam, you're quoting actually Yaakov from the Maimonides, who says that when we educate our children, you educate them with rewards so that they are incentivized to do it. But gradually, they shall learn how to do it on their own without the need of a reward, right? You want them to grow to be a mensch and to do the right thing, not just because of the reward. But and at the same time, Talmud says, using the same message that we shouldn't do things for the sake of the reward, but it's okay to fake it until you make it. That if you need that incentive, do it for the incentive, whether it's for the honor or for the good feeling. Do it for the wrong reason. Eventually, you're going to come to want to do it for the right reason. Absolutely.
Is it wrong to teach your children to do the mitzvahs to make up for your mistakes?
To make up for their mistakes, for like if the child made a mistake, you say do a mitzvah and it will take away the mistake.
Well, not take away, but make up for it a little
Correct.
bit. Show that you're not a complete Russia.
Interesting. Maybe in a previous generation, we would focus more on their mistakes or focus more on the Russia part. In our generation, especially with our children, and I would say equal with us, our focus is not as much on the correction or the mistakes. It's rather putting the past in the past and starting clean slate, fresh now, without lingering on the past. So, of course, teshuvah is a very powerful idea, and we do teach our children teshuvah, which is to correct your ways. But it's not as much as a focus. We don't want the kids to think of themselves, God forbid, as a failure that they're just trying to make up. We want them to see themselves as the handiwork of God, as the apple of God's eyes from the get-go, which they are, and we are also. So and that's really what Tanya is about. It's telling the Beinoni, like the beginning of the second chapter, which Yaakov we didn't study together, but it's just the general theme of Tanya, so you're familiar, that our neshama is literally a piece of God. You can't get closer. The angels can't get closer. Like we are the closest. We are a piece of God. We are part of God. We are the children of God. So a failure is not even an option. So of course we make mistakes, but that's not who that's not us. There's a beautiful expression where Rabbi Twersky, I may have quoted this in my class over here, but it's just a beautiful message. I think I quoted it in chapter 32. Rabbi Twersky, who is a PhD, unfortunately passed away last year at the age of 90. He says, someone asked him, do you have a soul? Like, do we have souls? And he says, we don't have souls. We are souls. I happen to have a body also, but my identity is the soul. That's who I am. So also when we look at ourselves and look at each other, look at our children, we see themselves as absolute success stories because that's exactly what they are. They are a piece of God and we are a piece of God. So that's one of the main themes of Tanya. And I apologize if that wasn't so clear in my learnings as we get into the nitty gritties, but that's an incredible theme. So, and Yaakov, just back to your first part, the third mission of Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Father, says, quoting a big sage, that you shouldn't serve our master for the sake of the reward. Rather, you should serve our master not for the sake of the reward. But as a result of that very famous teaching, he had two students who lost it. Two students of his. The famous story is they were students of his that were soaking in their teacher's every word. But when he mentioned that statement, that teaching, they were actually serving for the wrong reasons. And when they saw that they're not supposed to do it that way, they actually left the fold. And they created not even offshoots. They created the antithesis of what Torah is. They created heretical philosophies of teachings of Torah that they don't believe in Torah anymore. They only believe in the 5 books, but they don't believe in the oral Torah, which is essential to understanding the Torah. They were known as the Sadducees and the Baisusees that created incredible hardships for the Jewish people during the times of the Second Temple. It was a very, very difficult era, but it came as a result of the teacher saying, don't serve God for the wrong reasons. So they stopped serving God. So it's okay to serve God even or give charity because I enjoy what the charity makes me, how it makes me feel, or because I get my name on a building. It's okay. It actually is a mitzvah, equal mitzvah. If you're on a higher level, do it for a more altruistic reason, but it doesn't mean to stop doing it. Okay, we will continue. Of course, we're in the middle of the page. All the mitzvahs performed since Sinai, which is in the 14th century BCE. The Jewish year was 2448 of creation. All of our mitzvahs contribute to this effect. But the Tanya points specifically to the worship of the whole period of exile, beginning of the 1st century CE. For it is during this last exile that Clipa forces are at their strongest. And as a result, the neutralizing power of each mitzvah is also at its strongest. So this is just an interesting note where even though all of our efforts, not only from the time of exile, which happened when the Second Temple was destroyed, it's not only from that time that it's contributing our mitzvahs count, it's from the time of Sinai, which is many centuries before then. But the Alter Rebbe is specific to detail specifically the mitzvahs from the exile period, which was in the year 70 CE during the 1st century, because the Clipa force is stronger during this period of exile, and therefore the mitzvah power is also stronger. And that's just actually a beautiful message from even from this week's Torah portion. And Ruvain, we have Ron on our class now, so we'll dedicate the teachings of our Tanya class for Ruvain's mother, whose yahrzeit is today. Her name was Dina Bat Shmuel. Did I get that right, Ron? Okay, cool. And she last night I was listening to Ron when we had a minyan together. He was sharing ideas of his mother that every Friday night they would help make a show happen, and with a minyan and set up the synagogue, and they didn't do it for any ulterior motives. They did it for the right reason, which is Yaakov, similar to what you were saying, and understanding that all our mitzvahs contribute to this effort. So, while she graduated high school in the 1920s, don't think that her effort was only applicable in the previous generation. The Tanya is teaching us here is it all accumulates to one massive effort. So we have a direct connection with our parents, our grandparents, all the way through going up to the time of the beginning of exile. But this idea that specifically during the exile period, the Clipa force is stronger, and therefore the mitzvah power that we do is stronger also, is more potent, is a very powerful idea. In this week's Torah portion, we learn of the birth of the twins of Isaac and Rebekah. Their names were Yaakov and Esav. Esav came first. He was the evil twin, and Yaakov was as the Torah in this week's Torah portion says, Ishtam, Yoshev Alim. He was a perfect, full, wholehearted, simple person that was sitting in the tents and studying Torah. What's amazing is they were born exactly at the same time, because when Esav, such a Clipa force, was brought into this world, there needed to be an equal amount of good of Yaakov to combat it. So there always has to be that opposing force. And that verse from this week's Torah portion is actually quoted all the way at the beginning of Tanya that says there's an equal measure that was given to the godly soul and the equal levels of feelings and behavior was given to the animal soul, so that there's an equal, that we can make a free choice. So it's given equal sets of soul powers. So back to here, he's just, in the note, he just says that the Clipa force is strong during the time of exile, and therefore also the mitzvah power is strong during the time of exile to be able to combat that, so we have the strength. Okay, as we're back inside, as we noted in the previous chapter, the Messianic era is classically perceived as a time of reward, a period of human benefit rather than divine satisfaction. Yet here, the Messianic era is framed as a time when God's desires for creation are finally fulfilled, when he finally enters his home. To help reconcile these two approaches, the Tanya now offers a novel insight into the sage's teaching. The reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah, which is, like as I was quoting before from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. So just two perspectives on Mashiach. One is Mashiach, we reach our truth of who we are. We're always searching. Who are we? What are we? Yesterday, I was meeting with someone. I study Talmud with someone once a week. And I actually asked him, what is your passion? What are you passionate about? And he started listing mountain climbing, he said mountain biking and snowboarding. He listed like three things that are his passions in life. And trains, he's an engineer, so he enjoys seeing trains, building trains. And then, I pushed him a little more to see, where do you see your impact on the world? Like, what do you get satisfaction in seeing a change that you can make in the world? And they really got him to think, and really we all think about that. But when Mashiach comes, that will be the ultimate satisfaction that we have, when jealousy will be removed from the world, where our true, genuine heart will be fully expressed. And there'll be a lack of anger, a lack of war. It's a beautiful time for us, a real unity, no fragmentation, true harmony. These things are amazing. But what we're studying here is that Mashiach, that's not the view of how we're looking at Mashiach. The view of Mashiach is it's fulfilling the divine purpose, that God will have a true home in the world, where God's divine light will be fully expressed in the world. So is the era of Mashiach more about the human satisfaction, or is it more about, or the human benefit, or is it more about the divine satisfaction? So it can have two perspectives. And what we're going to do in the next few paragraphs is we're going to be reconciling both of these, how they're really all intertwined into one. So we're towards the bottom of the page. Because that which causes the reward for a mitzvah is that same mitzvah itself. And that's like we were quoting at the beginning of the class, examples where you could have an arbitrary reward, like doing homework and getting candy, or you could have a direct reward, which follows the effort you put in, like the effort of planting and sowing and watering and nurturing your tomato plants and getting and enjoying true, delicious organic tomatoes. That's a direct reward, is the tomato itself. So the direct reward for the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. What does that mean? So the plain meaning of the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah, so here he's going to explain it. He's going to quote one of the foremost commentaries of Mishnah. He was known as the Bar Tanura, because that's where he came from in Spain. His name was actually Ovadia. So there's a good wine called Bar Tanura wine. It's like a blue Moscato. And they're named after, I think it's made in Spain or Italy, actually. So it's around this area. The reward for a mitzvah, the mitzvah itself is a person that has done one mitzvah is orchestrated and assisted by heaven to do another one in order that he should be rewarded for both. So that's the simple meaning, that when you do a mitzvah, it orchestrates you to want to do another mitzvah. And then he's rewarded for both. However, the Tanya offers here a deeper explanation, that we are not speaking of one mitzvah leading to another, but one single mitzvah. The reward for a mitzvah is nothing other than the spiritual result of performing it. Because through performing the mitzvah, you pull down a disclosure of the blessed infinite light from above to below. In Hebrew, that's milmaila lamata, so that the blessed infinite light becomes enmeshed in the physical fabric of this world, which is an amazing idea. So schar, in Hebrew, the words are schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah. So the way the commentary of the Mishnah explains it is, the reward for doing a mitzvah is that it orchestrates in front of you the power to be able to do another mitzvah. Another mitzvah comes in front of you. But over here, the Tanya offers a deeper explanation that the mitzvah itself that is performed, the spiritual result of that mitzvah is the reward. What does that mean? Let's see further. Because through performing the mitzvah, we said that already, this reward is not something else given in exchange for performing the mitzvah, like being paid money for doing a job. That's arbitrary. Rather, the reward is you fulfill the purpose of creation by causing the blessed infinite light to be disclosed in this physical world through your mitzvah. So I just want to make sure this part is clear, because it's going to be a general theme here. So just to make sure I'm explaining this correctly, when I do a mitzvah, before I did a mitzvah, there's kind of a separation between this physical world and God's divine light. When I do a mitzvah of action, what I'm causing at that moment is for there to be an enmeshment, an enclothement, a connection between the divine light and this physical world. In other words, you're making a home for God right here. So that is the reward of the mitzvah. By doing the mitzvah, you're now connecting God's divine divinity, God's divine light into this world. You're making that connection between spiritual and physical. That they don't remain separate entities, they become totally one. So that is the reward. The mitzvah itself is the reward. I hope that's clear, and you'll probably continue to explain it.
It is clear, but I have a question.
Oh, sure.
It's clear as far as positive mitzvahs, but how does that work for negative mitzvahs? You know, I haven't murdered anybody today,
Right.
you know? What's my reward?
Robin, you live in Oakland. That's a pretty novel. That's pretty good. I'm kidding. That is a good question. So let me just elaborate on the question, and I would love to hear if anyone has an answer. So let's say a negative mitzvah, by not doing the negative action. So I'm actually not doing an action. I'm just not doing it. I'm sitting back from doing it. So you're not physically doing anything. So what spiritual connection am I making into this physical world? Is that your question? Good. I'm going to wait for someone else to answer. You have people that are older and wiser.
Or is it when, does it count when I want to murder somebody and I talk myself into not doing it? When I get the urge or compulsion and I tell myself, no, this is the wrong thing. Excuse me, this is the wrong thing to do.
Robin,
like
I've heard you mention murdering people quite a few times, right? I don't think that you've actually done that. So, you know,
40
on that.
40 years of criminal defense work.
Wow.
This is how I think.
Yeah. But as a criminal defense attorney, you should know that the reward for not murdering somebody is another day of freedom.
Good point.
Didn't we learn in chapter 36? Didn't we
assuming-
learn in chapter 36 that by refraining from doing the negative mitzvah, we're somehow dampening or neutralizing the power of the Clipa?
Good.
Beautiful. So you're saying, that's amazing, Mr. Berger. You're saying, so can you elaborate on that a little more? So there is an action that is related to your efforts. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah, it's a spiritual kind of a I don't know if you call it a reward, an occurrence that the power of the Clipa is weakened.
I like that. And Maddie, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that the reward would maybe be something around awareness. Like the more you're thinking about that, like what you haven't done, like I haven't murdered someone today, or I haven't done this thing that would be a negative mitzvah, would mean that you're very aware of the fact that you're not doing it and you're connected. So there would probably be some sort of spiritual reward for that. Just knowing, just being aware and just being very mindful of your actions, I think would be a really great way to live your life.
It's beautiful. And to add to that, and then Nancy, I would love to hear what you have to say. Let's take away the word murder, because hopefully that's a little bit further. But
intent.
we could also, I mean, when we say murder, we could also talk about spiritual murder. There's things that we say that could hurt someone to the point where they feel like a nothing. Spiritually, I mean, it's brought in Talmud. The idea of when you shame someone and their face becomes red, that itself is like you're spiritually murdering them. When the blood is all around their face, it's a spiritual. It's a very obviously subtle. You're not going to get found guilty in court, but there's a spiritual degree that you're hurting someone at that point, and that itself is tantamount. But take other mitzvahs also. The idea of not to get angry is, when you're like I think Robin, I think you were saying when you're holding back from that anger, that itself has a strong sense for yourself, the awareness that comes as a result of the patience, of the control that you're putting yourself through, but also to a certain degree, I think we're going to learn soon how to try to make things tangible in the physical realm. So even prayer, we don't just pray in our mind or heart. You're actually supposed to move your lips when you pray so that there is a physical expression of your prayer. So it's brought into this world and it makes that perfect fusion between divine and physical. Or some people shuckle. I think we spoke about it before. We shake a little bit when we pray because, again, it's bringing it down in more of an active awareness that we see, that other people see, and it's utilizing your whole body in that effort. Nancy, I would love to hear what you have to say.
Wait, so we've got the whole gamut of thought, speech, and action.
Exactly, which is the ultimate when it's fully immersing your behavior from your thought, speech, and action involved in the mitzvah. Excellent. But and I think the chapter will continue to give examples as we move along. But Nancy, I would love to hear what you have to say.
What I'm finding by actually reading the Torah anew each day, it says in our prayer book, but trying to read the Torah each day, there are negative things. We are being given instructions. If you look at the Torah as an instruction manual, so to speak, although Tanya is the practical tools, but if you look at the Torah as our divine instruction manual, do this, don't do this. And, I think I don't know all 613 can say that. I know it's Rambam, I think, that has listed them all, but I just studying a little bit of Torah each day as we get to, as Jews throughout the year, more keeps on being revealed to us. The do this, don't do this is in the Torah. And, to Robin's point, yes, it's don't murder. To your point, yes, it's don't gossip about each other, or, all these other things that are, what we just said, more subtle, but more of them are revealed to us by studying the Torah, even if it's like hard for us to grasp this year. Then that's why, we look at what the Rebbe said, or what the Alter Rebbe said, or what the Baal Tov said, or whatever, so that we can begin to understand more about the negative as well as the positive. And that's why we're on a lifelong journey, because it's not something we're going to get all 613 today. So that's just my thought.
I love that. Thank you, Nancy. Very, very well said. Yes, Yaakov.
Not to beat the murder thing to death. That was supposed to be funny. But like I said, you don't murder, you don't go to jail or prison, but you also got to think of what's involved physically and emotionally and spiritually when you do get locked up, right? Because yes, that's a physical action, but to relate the physical action to a more emotional and spiritual thing is, if you murder somebody, you're put in a confined place. You're told when you can eat, when you sleep. You're told where to go. You have no choice but to do what somebody else wants you to do. Okay, so if using that same example, if you're the butt of somebody else's put downs, right? You feel uncomfortable about going to a place you used to like to go to, so you feel you can't anymore, right? So you're basically, somebody's telling you where you can go. you know, and how you should feel, and, you know, stuff like that. If you think of the deterrence for things, right? The deterrence of, you know, if I do something bad to somebody, right? How is that going to make them feel? And then in turn, how is that going to make me feel? The more you think about that stuff, the less you want to do it, the more that you're apt to be following the mitzvahs.
Nice.
In my view.
Good. Yeah, thank you.
And to pray. Okay.
Well said. Thank you. And I'll just also answer one question that I see came up about getting on our knees when we pray. It's actually a very non-Jewish idea. We actually almost never get down on our knees because it was done as a form of idolatry. So even though it was done by Jews in the times of the Torah, you see the prostration of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when they prayed to God. But once it was done as a form of idol worship, it's actually not allowed to be done anymore. In Jewish law, in the exception when the Jews were in the temple, they did bow to God. They were on the floor of the temple. They would totally bow when they would hear God's name on Yom Kippur by the Kohen Gadol. And once a year, to remember how they bowed, we also bow on Yom Kippur in synagogue. But it's very rare. It's done once a year. The more common one is every day when we pray, we don't bow on our knees because that's a form of idolatry. We actually just bow our head during the Amida. And also during the Aleinu, which is at the end of the prayer, we actually say Vanachnu Korim Umishtachavim, which means we bend and bow. We actually don't bow, we just bend, but we say that we bow. And that's actually a form of beautiful humility and surrender. When we bow our head, it's reminding ourselves that we should lower ourselves to be able to spiritually open ourselves to a more divine light. So there's actually, we bow during the Amida 4 times, and then at Aleinu. But the bowing again is just actually putting our head lower, we bend our knees, but we don't let it touch the ground. Yeah, yes, Barbara.
I have a question about that. Oh, sorry, does someone else want to ask first?
Yeah, and Maddie, we always give priority to those that have their video on, so you'll have to wait till after.
Oh, I can put my video on. I don't mind. I just had to put a scarf on my head.
Okay, no problem.
I really like what Nancy said, in that the reason that we read the Torah portion every year is to learn from it, and by doing it every year, you know, we come back to the same Torah portion every year, and if you take notes and you look at your notes, you realize that I have grown, I have changed.
Nice.
And so some of the mitzvot that you do, you force yourself to do because it's the right thing to do, and because you're growing, you rely on muscle memory. It's more like spiritual memory, and something that you're forcing yourself to do one year, you may very easily do the next year. And so we begin to grow.
Beautiful. And on that note, I'll put a plug for Nancy, who writes this beautiful Torah synopsis and teachings on the weekly Torah portion. She's been doing it since I think January or February. So it's really been going strong. You could just put your email in the chat or email it to me, and I'll pass it over to Nancy, and she'll include you in the weekly email. Yes, Maddie. Let's hear.
I was going to say, let's say someone is really struggling and authentically, like from their heart, not maybe from their mind or from their ego, they literally fall to their knees and they just feel like this is their way of praying and this is their feeling of connection to asking, because they physically in their body, in their human body, just don't feel like there's anywhere else to be. That feels like that's the authentic way for them to feel in connection to prayer. So you're saying that if you did that and that you really were maybe I don't know, like someone might find out that they're going to be homeless, or they've just gone bankrupt, or they've lost whatever it is that's just really huge for them, that they literally like fall to their knees and they're just like praying and asking for whatever it is they need to ask or pray for, that is not allowed. Like, is it really like that if a person is coming from a really sacred place and a place of helplessness or in need, that's it's not like I'm going to get on my knees and pray today. It's like I'm falling to my knees because I'm in such dire straits. So what do you say to that?
I think if it's really coming from an internal place, like it's the feeling that they have. I'm not going to tell them to not do it. Just like from a legal law perspective, they shouldn't do it on stone. That's actually in law. They could do it on carpet. They could do it on wood floors, just not on stone, because that's a full form of idol worship, to pray and to bow on stone. That's actually how they do it in idolatry. So that's actually forbidden. So just do it on a carpet and then you're fine.
Wow, that changes everything that you just said. That I've never heard you say that before. That's amazing.
Yeah, so the stone is actually in Jewish law that we don't bow on stone. So even when we do it on Yom Kippur, there's different years until we have our beautiful shul renovated and looking beautiful. We've been doing it in different locations. So some years, and Maddie, I think you've come sometimes. We've done it at a Homeward Bound. So we've done it in a hotel which has carpets, so that was fine. But some years we've done it at Homeward Bound, which is in Hamilton, which has marble floor. So then when we would bow, we actually put down tablecloths, and then we would bow on that, because it's actually forbidden to bow on stone. And actually on Yom Kippur here, we actually did it outdoors in our parking lot, and we did it in the parking lot. So I actually didn't know, I wasn't sure if the asphalt of the parking lot floor is considered stone or not. So I actually wasn't sure, and I still put tablecloth because I couldn't Google on Yom Kippur, so I didn't know what the answer was.
Wow, thank you for that.
Yes, Nancy, sorry. I would love to hear what you say.
I want to comment on what Michael, which was so powerful, and it really it's so our conscience to not do murder in Robin's example. But I want to make one thing clear, which is, we have been imprisoned, and many other people have been imprisoned for political reasons, because we're Jews or whatever, which is not the same thing. And from that perspective, I say they can't take away my thoughts. And what we learned from the survivors is that they didn't take away their thoughts. And a lot of them secretly did action, whether giving mitzvah to somebody of food when in deep need, or saying the Shema or something. In other words, yes, whatever the Nazis or whoever, the communists, whoever has been putting people in prison when they haven't done anything, as Yaakov was saying, or Robin was saying. But we need to, in my opinion, we need to make a distinction between that idea of being imprisoned when it was not something that we, quote, did, but was something that maybe, I don't want to say that we had no role, or that our ancestors or whatever had no role, but to me, there's a distinction. Yaakov was teaching us about our actions, our criminal actions versus the people do to us as, shall we call it, involuntary prisoners.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, no, well said. I totally commend you for that comment. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. I'll also answer just one comment on from Steve about impulse control. I think that's a really good question, and I'm struggling to answer that, Steve, and I think we've all been discussing it, but that is really asking it straight on. Is impulse control the mitzvah for negative mitzvahs? Meaning, is that the action that is involved in the negative mitzvah? Is it just iskafia, which is the word that we've been using over and over again in Tanya, which is impulse control? Is that considered the action of the mitzvah? Is that how you're totally bringing down the godly light into the world? And I think the answer is yes. But I like what Maddie said about that awareness, that appreciation of it, or maybe sharing that with someone else, that you're able to control yourself. Or, a story that comes, we're going to be learning it in a couple of weeks in the Torah portion, in like 4 weeks, about the story of Joseph, who's known as the tzaddik in the Torah, a successful man, the Torah calls him. Is he had a temptation. It was the house was empty. He was a slave at the time, and Potiphar's wife was attracted to him, and they were alone. And at the last moment, when he had this strong urge, it says to remove that urge, to really control himself, it says he planted his fingers in the ground, like to remove any urge that was going through his body. He was able to weaken that urge by, I mean, this is what the Rashi comments from the Talmud, that to remove that urge from him, he planted his fingers on the ground, and I'm assuming that means it was like painful for him, but it took the urge away from his body because it was going through his fingers. I'm not as sure exactly what that means, but I could see more of an action there. So I'm hoping, Steve, this chapter will explain more the action involved in that, but I don't recall at what point. So we'll see it. We'll see examples coming up actually on the next page.
Thank you.
Okay, of course. Okay, let's try to squeeze in a little more in our last 10 minutes. All right, so we are, so we just covered the deeper explanation that schar mitzvah, the reward for the mitzvah is the mitzvah, doesn't just mean like the commentary of the Bar Tanura that it's going to lead you to do another mitzvah. And we all know that feeling where you're in a momentum, you do a mitzvah, it inspires someone else to do a mitzvah, which is the standard meaning of the Mishnah. But the Tanya over here is giving a deeper meaning that the reward for the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, the divine energy that you bring to this world through the fulfillment of the mitzvah. And now it's enmeshed, that physical, in the physical fabric of the world, that is the reward for the mitzvah. So now we're towards the bottom of the page in the Kindle. And I think we're in the middle of 410. Now we turn to the precise spiritual dynamics of the mitzvah. As we learned previously, a mitzvah brings about a home for God below, because it causes God's light to be disclosed in a physical object. And in doing so, the mitzvah elevates the forces of Klipas Noga, which had previously ruled that object, bringing pleasure to God on high. So as I mentioned in the introduction to this class 2 weeks ago, there's two types of klipa. One is called 3 impure klipas, which have no redemption, no way of releasing it from the klipa. Then we also have what's known as klipas noga, or translucent klipa that you could almost see through. The way we explained it is it's a klipa that is redeemable, which means on its own, it's neutral. It doesn't have any holy parts to it. It doesn't have any unholy part. It doesn't have any impure parts to it. But it's up to you to either elevate it to higher, like take an apple or your coffee in front of you. You could either make a blessing before drinking it and after drinking it, and use that energy to either be more present with your family or work more focused, so that you're able to bring in the revenue to support your family and to be able to be a better servant of God. Or you could just eat it as a glutton and say, I don't like, it's just for no other reason, and then it's being downgraded. So you could either upgrade it, which is klipas noga, being elevated to kedusha, holiness, or you could downgrade it, which at that point it's klipas noga, this translucent klipa that is being downgraded to 3 impure klipas, which is, I think we called it opaque klipa. Let's see inside. And that disclosure of the blessed infinite light comes into an object which had initially been under the control of Klipas Noga. So now you're bringing Kedusha, that holiness, divine light, into Klipas Noga, and the object has been receiving its energy from Klipas Noga. A mitzvah may only be performed with an object which receives its energy from Klipas Noga, the least potent form of Klipa, which is capable of acting as a medium for God's presence to be disclosed. So just to explain this idea again, there are certain things that are forbidden. For example, marrying a brother to marry a sister is forbidden. There's no way to say, well, if I'm going to have the right intention and we're going to be extra kind to each other, there's no way to redeem that relationship to be a holy relationship. It's unholy, and there's no upgrading of that relationship. The same is also with eating non-kosher. You can't say, well, I'll eat the non-kosher salami, but then I'll use that energy to be able to serve God and be better. Even though you're using the energy, it's impure. There's no way of upgrading. But if it's a kosher salami, or if it's a kosher marriage, then you could use that harmony and use that energy from the salami in order to be able to be upgraded to Kedusha. So again, the divine light could only come into an object that was under the rule of Klipas Noga, which is the least potent form of Klipa. The Tanya now briefly reviews some examples of suitable Klipas Noga objects from the animal and plant kingdoms, as well as from non-living matter. So we weren't on Zoom when we learned this idea in chapter 6, so we'll get a good summary again over here from the Tanya. But what we're trying to explain is there's 4 general kingdoms of the world. The highest of them is Medaber, which is the human kingdom, me and you. Lower than us is the animal kingdom. Lower than that is the vegetable kingdom, the plant kingdom. And lower than that is the non-living, the inanimate, like a stone and water. So each one upgrades themselves to the higher one. But in general, those are the 4. So meaning plants receive their nourishment from the water. Animals receive their nourishment from the plants. Human receive their nourishment from all 3. So you see how each one is upgrading themselves into the higher one. But over here, I think he's going to go on a little bit of a different view. So let's just read that inside. Klipas Noga controls all ritually pure and kosher items with which the practical mitzvahs may be observed. For such as in the animal kingdom, the parchment on which to fill in a mezuzah or Torah scroll may be written. As our sages of blessed memory taught, only ritually pure species are fit for the work of heaven, and that which is permissible for your youth. For your mouth. That makes more sense. Okay, yeah. So let me just explain this idea before we continue on with the esrog one, which is also a good one. But just to explain this idea, in order for something to be used for holiness, it has to have not been part of the impure klipa. And it has to have been only part of klipas noga, which means the neutral type of klipa, the least potent klipa. So the examples he's giving here is to make a mezuzah, which comes from parchment, which comes from an animal, or to write a Torah scroll, which also comes from the hide of an animal, or to fill in, or a talis, it has to be from a kosher animal. Because if it wasn't a kosher animal, there's nothing wrong with a non-kosher animal, but it's not meant for you to upgrade to holiness. It's not upgradable. It's not able to be released and redeemed to a higher level. So if someone makes tefillin or writes a Torah on a non-kosher animal hide, it's actually not a good Torah, even though they had all the right intentions. But it can't upgrade it. It can't release it from the clutches of the klipa. But if it's a kosher animal, which means the kosher animal is not holy, but it's not non-holy, it's just klipas noga, which means it's a neutral energy. So when you write a Torah on it, you now upgrade that simple hide of an animal or that simple sandwich to now be a holy sandwich, to be when you make a blessing on it and you use it properly. And the same is with everything. It has to have been in the category of klipas noga, and then you could upgrade it to holiness. But if it started in the category of the 3 impure klipas, you can't upgrade it. So another example is, and we're about to learn it now, so I'll just give you the heads up, is something in Hebrew called arla. Actually, Shira is not able to be on the class today. Her husband's sister passed away last week, unfortunately. But she was asking me, her name was Victoria. She was a wonderful lady, and Thomas, which is Shira's husband, was his remaining family member in America. So it's been very hard on them. So we'll take a moment to wish well for Thomas and Shira and for the soul of their sister, Victoria. But anyway, she was just asking me about this topic called arla. So I just want to give you the background. Some of you are actually pretty familiar with it because one of the reasons of why we don't touch a Jewish boy's hair for the first 3 years is for this reason. The law is that when it comes to a tree, any fruit growing on a tree for the first 3 years, you actually don't touch. So for example, close to a year ago, maybe like 8 months ago, Nancy dropped this beautiful fig tree by our door. Remember that, Nancy? And so it's still not growing figs. I think it's going to be another couple of years until it does. But if it would grow figs, I wouldn't be able to eat the figs for the first 3 years. That's the law of Arla, which means don't touch the tree during the first 3 years. Only in the 4th year, in the times of the temple, they would actually bring it to Jerusalem. But nowadays, we would be able to benefit from it right away during the 4th year. For that reason, I'm just comparing it to actually children. Our Jewish boy, we actually don't touch his hair for the first 3 years, reminding ourselves of that mitzvah of Arla. Why the connection? We'll say for another class. But if you have an etrog, which is the citron that we shake on Sukkot together with the lulav, if you take a tree, an esrog from a tree of Arla, which means if the esrog tree was planted and it hasn't been planted yet for 3 years and you want to use it, you actually do not fulfill the mitzvah because it's not permitted to use as a mitzvah yet. It's not redeemable yet. I hope that makes sense. And we'll just finish this page, and I'm already getting a bing that it's 30. So let's just finish this paragraph then. Sorry for the delay. The same is true in the plant kingdom. For example, you may use an etrog, a citron, for a mitzvah, and we see that from Leviticus, provided that it is not prohibited by the biblical injunction against Arla, which prohibits the first 3 years of fruit from a tree, in which case it would come from the completely impure klipas. Let's just wrap up with a practical lesson. So you do not have this practical lesson. Oh, did I not? I'm sorry, I didn't share the screen, right? For the last paragraph. All right, my bad. But I'll just continue, I'll conclude the practical lesson, and maybe we'll review this Esrog part because I did not share that part. We're on 410, just for the practical lesson. The reward for a mitzvah in the Messianic era is to experience the greatness of the mitzvah itself, and that it brought God's infinite light into the world. Awesome. So I hope that inspires you today and until we meet again to be able to do a mitzvah and realize and meditate on the fact that my mitzvah is actually creating this incredible fusion between godliness and physical, which seems so opposite. Godliness and physical seem like they don't really match, they clash. But yeah, when you do a mitzvah, you make the beautiful harmony between the two. So go ahead and do that mitzvah, and we'll see you soon.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you so
everyone.
much.
Bye, everyone.
I have a question for you.
Oh, sure. I'll stay on. And anyone who wants to leave, you could leave, but I will stay on with Cheryl.